Hi, React Helsinki. I'm here with Columbia Road, and my name is Rory, and I'm here to talk to you about state management. So I work as a managed services lead at Columbia Road. And what does that mean in practice? Well, actually, that's a really good question because I haven't quite yet figured that one out myself, but I do know that it means working with React applications, and I have also worked with many React applications in my past projects during my time. So, we all know that state management in the front end is not a particularly easy task. There's so many different ways to manage it, there's so many complexities there, and if you're having your data coming from all over the place, it can be a really, really difficult one to sort of get and not have it look like total spaghetti. So let's say you turn to using some kind of state management library or tool or framework, and then you are suddenly thrown with loads of different options. Maybe you want to go with something more legacy, like Redux or MobX, which has been tried and tested. Maybe you want to go with something a bit more new, like Recoil, or maybe you're using GraphQL and you want to use Apollo. You could even decide to use a different language entirely and go to Clojure or to Reason, which I know have been popular in certain applications. Or maybe you could use Kotlin or even Scala. I haven't seen these used in the wild, but maybe there are people out there using that. So it's one thing that's important to consider is that actually React itself is just a state management library. The fundamental purpose of React is being able to pass around data to different parts of your application where you can then render this data. And React has its own ways of being able to pass around state. Of course, it uses state and props. And there's other tools as well which might be useful without you needing to even resort to using a state management library at all. So those of you who have been working in more, let's say, legacy React applications, you remember the times where you had to pass down every single piece of state through all of your components for it to be able to reach the leaf node without having any other option. And in these kind of situations, you would then turn to Redux or MobX because that gave you a centralized way of being able to manage your data and pass it around to all of your different components. But this is now 2020 and we have different ways of doing this. So maybe we could consider doing things like keeping it simple, just using hooks. I mean, hooks are such a fantastically boring way to manage your data, and that's brilliant. You can look at this code and you immediately are unable to understand exactly what's going on here. And it's just a couple of lines to be able to declare your state and then immediately render that. So this is one really simple way of just managing data. And then if you want to then compose different components to be able to pass your data around, you don't have to drill that through all your components. You can do simple things, just like composition here with this button group component, where I'm then composing different components inside, and the button group doesn't need to know about the data that's being rendered in the children. And then let's say, for example, you want to pass data far down your component tree. Well then, in that case, you can then turn to something like context, which allows you to define a context, and then you can create a consumer of your provider further down the tree, and then you can just render your data there. Of course, you should use context sparingly because every time you use context, you're sort of like sprinkling in a little bit of magic. And if you're using that in too many places, then it can be difficult to understand. But everything else beyond this is kind of just a design pattern. I mean, okay, maybe there's a little bit more to it than that, but generally state management libraries are just bringing you into a framework of thinking as opposed to bringing out too much in terms of code. Of course, there is certain benefits there and certain things that are really, really nice to have, but a lot of it is just bringing you into a way of organizing your data. And it's also important to remember that every time you npm install something, that's an additional piece of mental baggage for you and your team to have to consider in the future. And it's also not just your team now, but it's also the people that come in. That's a new point that you have to onboard someone onto. And it's a new point of maintenance, and it's a new library that might be updated in a way that's breaking to your existing version of your app. So it's important to know that if you can keep things simple, then of course you should. The best code is always the most boring, and I mean, of course it can be fun or sexy to be able to install the newest and shiniest libraries, but keeping things boring means it's most maintainable long into the future. So the message from this talk really is just the one line that many of us have heard before is keep it simple, stupid, and you can manage your data in your React applications in the best way.